Welcome to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews, and convention panels. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, assigned to Ragnarok Story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and rpgpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
So welcome to Getting Published, Query Letter to Contract. I guess we'll start just introducing ourselves. Do you want to get us started?
So I'm S.J. Schauer. I am independently published at this time. I have been with traditional small presses in the past. I write the Spiral War Universe series of books. So yeah.
I'm Sarena Ulibarri. I'm the author of 2 novellas. Both are published with a small press. 2 different small presses, actually, which have been 2 different experiences. I've also published about 50 short stories, and I run a small press called World Weaver Press that mainly focuses on short fiction anthologies, like themed anthologies, and I've run that for about the last 8 years. So I could probably recite short fiction contracts to you in my sleep between being published and publishing others. So yeah, I can talk about it both from the editor side and the author side, but mainly my experience is small press.
And I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal fiction and nonfiction. I'm kind of all over the map, having done fiction and nonfiction. I am traditionally published. I am indie published. So yeah, pretty much the whole thing. So let's start with, I guess we'll start with you, SJ, right?
Yeah.
Kind of for your path to publishing, both on the indie side and the small press side, kind of how did you get hooked up with that small press, and what was your process?
So I was writing for years and just really unfocused. I had an idea of a story I wanted to write, and I kept writing it and rewriting it. And then at one point when I discovered KDP, the early version of KDP, I'm like, you know what? To heck with it. I'm just going to, I sent out query letters and always was getting rejected. And I just finally said, you know what? The heck with it. I'm just going to do it. And I really should not have. The book was really not ready. There were parts of that book that I wrote in high school and had never touched again. And it was bad. But I'd never really given it to anybody to look at. And that's one of the first things I'll say to people. Give it to people to read. Give it to beta readers. Find somebody else, not your family, not your friends. There's plenty of writing groups and writing websites out there that will give you advice and that kind of thing. And it was not doing anything. And then finally somebody left a really scathing review on it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is absolute garbage. And I took it back and I rewrote it. Well, I was rewriting it, working with a couple other authors to edit it. And we were kind of working on a thing together, hey, let's get together. Let's do a small press together. Let's release it together. We'll do our own things. And I had a whole marketing plan all laid out with a podcast I was working with, and then the podcast went away and I lost my entire marketing plan. But at the same time I was doing a bunch of reviews. I would do reviews on my way old Blogspot website. And through that podcast, as it was fading away, they would send me books to review. And I reviewed a anthology of short stories. And I'm like, okay, and the publisher reached out to me and said, hey, we really like that you didn't just review the anthology, you reviewed every story in the anthology. Because most anthologies reviews are like, well, here's this great anthology with some stories are great and some stories are not so great, but the whole, it's a great thing. And I went through and I reviewed every single one. And he's like, I really appreciated that. And he's like, well, would you like to do some reviews of other books we've got coming out? And I said, you know what? Sure. And I was already getting ready to self-publish at this point. I had created covers, I had worked with artists, I was getting ready to go. And, but I said to him, the acquisition editor, I said, hey, I also write. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, send me your book. Sent it to him. And he was really impressed. He liked it. He's like, hey, it needs editing. We have a good editor on staff, really nice lady. And she edited the books, really loved it. And they redid the covers, and I absolutely hated the covers they did. That is always going to be a sore spot for me. I hated the covers they did. They were atrocious. Not to say that the covers I did were particularly fantastic, but because I designed all my own ships and stuff, I said, look, I have the assets. I can give you the visual assets. And they had also promised me a certain cover artist, a fairly famous cover artist in England. And I'm like, okay, hey, awesome. And no, they did it themselves. And I'm like, really? And then after about a year, the acquisitions editor got fired. He got into a fight with the owner of the publishing house, and he got fired. And the new owner really didn't want to do sci-fi. He despised sci-fi. And he's like, he straight up said to me one time, I would never have acquired your books. And I'm like, okay, thanks. I'm like, am I going to get any of the support I was promised, that I was contracted for? And he's like, well, yes, but it was the absolute minimum because he just did not like sci-fi. And I'm like, ugh, really poisoned the well in terms of small presses for me. And then I saw where it was going because I was talking to some of the other authors, and they were like, yeah, they're going downhill fast. They are like hemorrhaging money. They are going to close. He's in poor health. His daughter wants to just liquidate the whole thing. And I'm like, okay. And I spoke to a couple other authors who've been with small presses that went under. And they're like, buy your rights back now. Because otherwise you're going to be in litigation hell for years until you can get it back.
Yes.
And I said, okay. And I'm like, how much to get my rights back? And he's like, oh, well, and he gave me a number. And I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous. I'm like, I know you have not put that much money into this. And he's like, well, you can't prove it, blah, blah, blah. And I spoke to one of the other authors. He's like, oh, no, it's this much. Because he'd just done the same thing. He had one book. I had 3 books on contract, and then they had right of first refusal on every other book in the series. And we were getting ready to release book 4. And I'm like, so what do we do? And he's just like, we agreed to a number, I got my rights back, and I sat there and said, I'm going to do a relaunch, I'm going to put new covers on, but I wanted to do it right away, so the first book, I did the cover on. And it was more what I wanted, but it looked like an author engineer did it. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was better than what it was. The second one, I didn't have the time to really redo that, and I just said there was one key thing on that cover I hated. The guy had a head that was like this tiny. And he's like, this was his head. And I'm like, no. Because he gave me the files, I expanded his head, and it had like generic ship number 52 on the cover. And I'm like, nope, pull that out, throw in the actual assets, worked with some artist friends of mine, rejiggered it, and I'm like, there we go, that goes out. The third cover was actually one I had commissioned from an artist friend, so I'm like, yeah, that just goes back. That's beautiful. But I was getting ready to launch the 4th book, and I kept the editor. That was like the best thing out of that experience. I kept the editor. Not the greatest editor, not the worst editor, but they were cheap and they did a good job. I was on a budget. And went to my artist and I'm like, hey, how much for a cover? He's like, I'm too busy right now. He's like, I'm going to be busy for the next 2 years on projects. And I'm like, crud. And I went on DeviantArt and found an artist I liked. I found 4 artists, sent them to him, and I said, which one? He's like, this one. And I commissioned that artist for the next 2 books to do covers on. And I loved his covers. Covers were awesome. Launched, did the next 2 books, and then during COVID, this author friend of mine was starting up a small press, and she was hosting a bunch of virtual conventions. And I did a couple panels and virtual signings, which was so weird. And basically you're just pimping your ebook and getting people to buy your ebook live. And then you're sending them like a little JPEG of a signature. It was so weird, and it was so surreal. But she was starting up a small press, and she was fairly successful in independently publishing her own stuff. Her partner worked in film, so it was like, hey, you had the film connections. I'm like, hey, this is going to be awesome, right? You know, so we relaunch, we redo the logos, all the covers get redone. Re-edited, and we relaunched the first 5 books in rapid succession, rapid relaunch. And that was going pretty good for about a year, and then they reach out to me, they're like, look, we're not getting the sales we thought we were. We did this movie project that's not getting the return we thought we would. And they're like, we're just giving you your rights back. And I'm like, are you sure? They're like, yeah. They're like, look, just for the last quarter, if you don't mind, we're just going to keep the profits from the last quarter because we need it to just kind of stay afloat. And I'm like, you know what? You're my friend. Yes. I commissioned her for the cover of the 6th book. And when I do the 7th book, I'm going to have her do the cover because it's the same style. Yeah. I want to keep that same style throughout. And she also, I paid her to do the layout on the interior, and it was about 80% there when I sent it to her, the layout, and she just did the last kind of the biggest complaint I got on the 6th book when I released it was there were a couple editing mistakes that did get caught, and that's because I self-edited again, and because I did an experiment, and cringe, please, you're gonna cringe when I say this, I used Grammarly. Well, what I did was I took a chapter, an unedited chapter from book 4 or 5, and compared it to what the editor did and what Grammarly kicked out. And it was about 95% there. And I'm like, you know what?
I'm not going to cringe. I think Grammarly is a very useful tool.
But I say that to some authors, and they're just like, whoa, no, you have to hire an editor, you have to hire an editor. And I spoke to one professional editor who's like, actually, I do use it, and then I just do another read-through.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, it's a good tool. It's a good tool. Why would I not use a good tool? So I'm like, okay, book 7, when I finish it, I will, I'll do a Grammarly pass, do a reread, pass through and do it. Because they're like, my first editor laughed. She's like, yeah, you're a pilot, right? Yeah. You're an aerospace engineer, right? Yeah. You used the wrong hanger.
Oops. To be fair, we've all been there, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you run it through spell check, and spell check's like, well, hanger, and it's like, it sees the misspelling of hanger, and you're like, okay, well, fix all. Fix all. No, fix all is bad.
It is very difficult to edit your own work because you know what it's supposed to say. So you go through it and you just skip right over it, and it's like, oh, how did I write that? I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're just looking at 100,000 words, 120,000 words, and you just don't have the focus to.
And that's why beta readers are very important. Even if you're independently published, find a beta reader. Find somebody you trust who's going to be like, you echoed, and echoing the thing that I have a bad habit of. And for those who don't know what echoing is, it's like repeating the statement, but in a different way. Because you're just stream of consciousness writing, and you're like, it's like, and then somebody reads it, it's like, why did you say this twice? And I'm like, I didn't say it twice.
It's so easy to do, especially if you're writing in a hurry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So one trick you can do is change your font and your font size and then read it. and then also have your word processor read it out loud to you.
Oh, yeah, I've heard
Because
that.
I've done the thing.
Oh, yeah.
And when you hear it, you're like, oh. So those are two tricks.
I've also heard the tip of reading it backwards.
Yeah, most people are not willing to go line by line through it.
Well, not line by line, but you go, okay, you take a chunk and then you read it, and then you go back a chunk, then you read it forward, go back a chunk.
Yeah.
Because that gets you out of the story that you're telling.
You can focus.
So the problem is if you've written it and you've designed it, you know where it is anyway.
Well, it's always like one of the things I had, like I put a mystery in one of them, and I'm like, to me, it glares. It's like spotlights. And I'm like, when I asked the beta readers, like, did you see it? Did you see it? Did it surprise you? They're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good.
So Sarena, I guess for you it's kind of a chicken and the egg question. You are both an author and a publisher. So which came first for you?
Well, I have been publishing short fiction for a long time. I started getting short stories published in about 2011, and then I was hired as an assistant editor at the small press that I now run in 2014. So I guess, I was hired as an assistant editor, and then in 2016, all of a sudden the publisher said, "I'm done. I'm burnt out. We're closing down." And I was like, whoa, we just signed a whole bunch of new contracts. Like, we have these series that are in the middle. Like, what's going on? And
I can run it.
And well, yeah. So I was like, what would it cost to for you to sell me the press? And it was like nothing. And so I was like, fine, I will be the savior. I will jump in and take over the press. But I was only an assistant editor at the time, so like I had worked with the words on a couple of books. I didn't know how to do cover design. I didn't know how to do formatting. I didn't know how to calculate royalties. I didn't know
that was
any of that
my
stuff.
next question is like, did you know what you were really getting into?
No, not a clue. And so I took over and had to learn that stuff really fast. And the first author that I worked with did not have a good experience. And I learned with each book, and when I got to a point where I did feel like I knew what I was doing, but I had to learn a whole bunch of new skills really quickly.
Yeah.
So,
has it been worth it? Has it been worth it? Are you glad you did it?
Yeah, I'm glad I did it. I'm done with it now. Like I am now ramping it down, but I'm ramping it down slowly and gracefully, and and not in the big fiery ball that so many small presses go out with. But now at this point, like I've run it for 8 years. I accomplished what I wanted to. I did the best I could for the authors, and and then did some anthology projects that got a lot of like international attention, and so I think it was a good thing, and so so I guess being a publisher came first, So this book was just published this year by Stella Foreign Press, which is a small press in Canada. And this book I had queried to agents in 2019, and got a lot of like requests, but then no offers. And I shelved it. And then in 2021, one of my beta readers, or my critique partners, rather, I should say, critique group, pointed out this small press that was having an open call, and said, you should really send your Death Valley book to this, because the book takes place in Death Valley, because it really seems like it fits. And so I hemmed and hawed over it, and then pulled the book out, looked at it, realized why the agents did not accept it, and rewrote it, almost completely in just a couple months, and cut it from an 89,000 word novel to about a 40,000 word novella.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Cut out all the superfluous, subplots, and combined some characters and things like that. Really brought it down to what the core story was. Sent it to the small press.
You were vicious with that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about killing your darlings.
Yes.
Yeah, seriously.
Metaphorical machete to it. So, but sent it to the small press, and they accepted it. But I also, as I was rewriting, I was also really tailoring it to what that small press did. And, it was already close to what they wanted, and I just, because I knew I was rewriting it to send to them, I really rewrote it for them.
Right.
And And so and it got accepted. But it was, even though it's a small press, it was still 18 months before it came out, which is often what it is for for traditional publishing. So, and the editor was actually quite rigorous. Again, we went through like 5 edit rounds.
Oof, wow.
And I was sick of it by the time it came out. Like by the time it came out and people were wanting me to like read excerpt, I'm like, I never want to see it again. Everyone else to read it.
You went from 89,000 words down to 40,000 words, and then you go through 5 edits.
Yes.
Wow, I know. So you have to think you're done after you go from 89,000 to 40,000 words, right?
Well, and even the acceptance was a little bit conditional, even because the editor said, I really like this book, but there's something off about the ending, and can you change this big thing about the ending? And I had to think about that, of course, and be like, is this, is that compromising what I wanted? I decided, no, that actually is a better idea, and that actually is more in line with what I wanted, and I had done the ending in a certain way because of someone in my critique group saying you really need more conflict here at the end or something like that. And it's like, so it was kind of tacked on. So I knew that we would go through at least some edits, but when it kept coming back, I was like, I'm done with this freaking book.
So you guys both bring up really good points, because you're talking about the stuff you wrote in high school. You're talking about whittling down your story. Whether you are going to query an agent or a publisher, or if you're going to indie publish, how do you know when your manuscript is ready? Like, what is your gauge for that?
I mean, I usually feel like it's ready when I kind of stop thinking about it all the time. Like when I feel like I've put as much into it as I can, and I'm ready to move on to another project. Because when it's not done, I keep thinking about it. I keep having to pull out my phone and like go to my notes app and like, okay, I should change this. I should do this. I should add this in. And when I stop doing that, right, and I'm thinking about another project, and that's where my mind goes. That's when it feels like it's done to me. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But that's when I feel like it's ready for at least to try and send it out.
Right. And what's your gauge?
For me, especially like early on, I was subscribed to an online writers workshop, and that's actually the name of it, Online Writers Workshop. And it was a for-fee website. And what it is it was a bunch of other writers, and you would submit chapter by chapter, and people would review it and edit. And it was supposed to be more reviewing than editing, but we're writers, we edit. But in order to get credit to do it, you have to it's like for every one you submit, you have to review 3.
That makes perfect sense.
And it was great because then it made you look back on your stuff and say, well, I just critiqued this person for this. Oh, yeah.
But the only risk I would see with something like that is you're pleasing other writers and maybe not so much readers.
And that was one of the other things I did too, is I said, okay, I've worked through it with the writers. And I mean, when I first rewrote this, I rewrote the first couple chapters, I want to say a dozen times, because it went from this, hi, here's this person and that person. It's like, here's the character list, to, no, I'm just throwing right into it. Here's the core characters. Other characters are being introduced as they come in more naturally. And it created a much better progression of how characters went through. I remember I was working with one author on a particular scene of one chapter in book 2 that we went back and forth on for 2 months because he disagreed with my math. And I'm like, no, my math is right. And he's like, no, your math is wrong. And finally I sat down and I showed it to him, like, I'm an engineer, I know my math's right.
Oh my God, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're
well, I had characters jumping from very close together flotsam and jetsam in space onto a spinning space station.
You're one of those.
Yeah, one of those. It was a survival exercise for the characters. And I changed it from, well, I can't have them jump out onto the outer spin ring because that's going to kill them.
So you wouldn't happen to be like an aerospace engineer or something like that?
Just answer your question. Yeah, and all the ships on there I designed.
So you work for Raytheon, huh?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
No, I'm actually DOD. So I oversee Raytheon and I tell them when they're screwed.
Gotcha.
And that's a job I just started. So, but no, it's like it comes down to the beta readers. Because I had alpha and beta readers at one point. I had an alpha reader that's like, as soon as I finished a chapter, I'd send it to her and say, hey, what do you think? And she'd be like, yeah, you need to change that. And she was Southern though, so it was a very different perspective than some kid from Arizona, from a guy in Arizona. And she's like, you talk about smell a lot, like body odor. And I'm like, yeah, because it's visceral. It engages people. It's like, person opens up their flight suit and they smell themselves for the first time in 3 hours and they go, oh God, And she's like, well, she's Southern. She's like, we don't talk about that. I'm like, I'm sorry, this is what pilots do,
Yeah, and I'll add what you were saying about, other authors critiquing your work and stuff. Whether it's other authors, beta readers, if you have a content or a story editor, you don't have to take everyone's advice, and I think that is a skill you have to learn, is to gauge. Is this just their opinion, or is this something that the majority of my readers are going to feel?
And your themes better than anybody else. So at a certain
Right.
point, you have to make the judgment that.
And you start to know your readership as well, and kind of know, like I know kind of what my readers want and don't want in one of my novels. And so I'll have some of my beta readers, like one will be like, no, you need to do this, and the other one will be like, no, you need to do this, and it's like, well, I have to go. What are my 70-year-old ladies gonna like who are reading my books? And so, yeah, I think that's just a matter of learning to discern what advice to take.
And that's why I was fine with Grammarly, because I go, I don't have to take what they suggest.
Right? No, but it's a good way
enough times I'd be like, they're like, oh well, this sentence would be better if you did this. I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's right. As much as I don't want to admit that the machine is right, you know what? It's right.
Sometimes it's right. Yeah.
Well, especially when it's talking things like readability.
Yeah.
And it's like, to you, it reads fine. But to some 20-year-old kid who's never, or 60-year-old grandma who's not an expert in that field, they're like, what? But that's one of the things that I mean, because outside of publishing this, I work on a lot of documents and reports. And I'm like, I'll get stuff from engineers and go, okay, now rewrite it so a business major can understand it. And they're just like terrified of that aspect. Because I'm like, sorry, it's not an engineer who does the final approval. It's the business majors.
So that lowest common denominator, right?
Yeah, but because
I hate to
you're
put
an
it that way.
engineer, don't you have because you're an engineer, don't you have readers that aren't engineers too? Because of course you as an engineer know what it says, but some
But one of the things that I
layperson that might
specialized
work at
in,
Walmart doesn't.
but one of the things that I've always specialized in throughout my engineering career is, okay, hi, engineers, what's this say? Okay, no, now I'm going to turn it into something that a colonel will understand and a business major will understand. And, hi, passive voice, you're going away.
Yes.
Oh, passive voice.
I did a full flight test report and scrubbed all the passive voice out of it. Got it totally to tongue and quill standards. All the passive voice was gone. Sent it to the colonel. Colonel sent it back. Says put the passive voice back in. And I'm like, yeah. just no.
Well, no, I mean, there's technical fields that want the passive voice, and it's just I'm thinking about like biology papers, and they all want the passive voice, and it's just like you're making this unreadable because you want to pretend that anybody who does this thing will have the same result.
I think we're kind of off the description.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, it's okay. But what I like to kind of hear is like, if you're going to tell to someone how to go from unpublished to this is a part-time career or a full-time career, like what would be the path? I've read things like, oh, you publish locally, then you kind of go regionally, then you try to go nationally, blah blah blah. Like what is a good path for someone, like just to take and try?
This is going to sound like a non-answer, but the right path for you.
Okay.
If you are interested in publishing it yourself, it is a great deal of work. I prefer it because I get more money every time I sell a book, but also I have much more control. Like I just recently rebranded my original series with brand new covers. I even changed the genre because the genre has shifted from what it was when I first originally published it. It was paranormal romance 10 years ago, and now paranormal romance is really spicy, and my books no longer fit that category. So now it's urban fantasy. But But if you do want to get a publisher, then again, you have a decision to make. Do you want to go with a small press? Do you want to go with a hybrid publisher where, kind of you've both got some skin in the game? Or do you want to try and go after one of the bigger traditional publishers? And I think part of it is how long do you want to wait before you see your published book in your hands? Because I know for me, originally with my urban fantasy series, I wanted to get it traditionally published, and I went through the whole process of getting an agent to represent me, and then she was shopping it around, and it was just a long process. And then unfortunately she wound up having to retire because of health issues, and so I broke my ties with the agency and published it on my own. But it's just, there's so many things to consider about how much work you want to do yourself, what kind of timeline you're looking at for what you want to publish. So I would say it's really depending on your goals as to what you want to do.
And
Can we just go back one step?
Sure.
Okay, how do you even, you say, okay, maybe I want to self-publish, maybe I want to go how do you find the publisher to begin with?
There are some, like you were talking about being a subscriber to Writer's Digest, mm-hmm. There's some great guidebooks out there. There's a guide to agents, literary agents, that tell you what kind of work they're looking for, what genres, and how to submit things to them. There's also a book that is publishers, and you can go through and find out. But a lot of publishers, I don't know about small press necessarily, but a lot of publishers don't want you, the writer, directly contacting them. They want your agent contacting them. But again, the books will have that information. What are they called? It's the
slush pile.
No, I mean the books though that publish all those.
The book, the big book of publishers. Yeah,
I should know this.
I know the one you're talking about, but I can't think of it on the top of my head.
Like the Writer's Market.
Yeah, Writer's Market. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's Query Tracker, which is a website that is like a database of agents, and so if you're going that route. Sorry, what?
Are they attached to Reedsy or?
I don't know. But I don't know. But it's a database that has agents that it tells you what they represent, and it's actually like a kind of a social media site, like an old-fashioned one where people can leave comments, and some people will post like their rejection letters, or the feedback that they got, which is useful to you to see if that seems like an agent that you would want to work with.
And whether or not they're actually reading it. Because sometimes you just get that form letter that says, we are not interested in this time, with no further comment.
Yeah, and this can give you a sense of how long they take to respond as well. Is this an agent that responds, the same day you send it, or is this one that you're going to wait 6 months for that form rejection, or things like that? So
Piers Anthony used to maintain a website that it was a list of publishers, small press, large press, and vanity press. And he would review them and say, okay, this one, Publish America, avoid.
Wow, I did not know he did that.
Oh yeah, it was a great resource. And he would update it like every month or so.
Well, he's kind of gotten pretty isn't he like barely writing now?
He's pretty much retired. But he became a very big fan of, like Mike Stackpole, like Tim Zahn, like a lot of other authors. Like, we are much more fans of independent writing now. They're like, because they get more of their money back. And also they have the backing at this point that they can sit there and say, okay, I'm going to launch a Kickstarter, pay for the cover work, pay for the editor, even though they already have a partnership with their editor at that point in their career. But they're like, they become much more interested in independent publishing because it's better for the author in a lot of ways, but it's still seen as not as prestigious as being with a traditional publisher, by a lot of people. And it's harder sometimes to get into Barnes and Nobles, to get into the small bookstores. You have to build those alliances. And they said, the old method of getting out there was like, submit a bunch of short stories, get a bunch of short stories published, submit to contests. I won 3 flash fiction. I won and came in second and third in 3 flash fiction contests, which are less than 1,000 words. And that was nuts. I mean, trying to make a story, build an entire story in less than 1,000 words. And what they would do is say, here's a bunch of images. Take an image, write your story based on that. And I became a judge for them before they finally stopped doing them. And I did have a couple of short stories published, and I'm like, I don't even know where anymore because it was like 20 years ago. And but it gets your name out there, and it gets it into places that agents are going to see it. You basically build a resume, just like any other job. You build a resume, and then you send that out to agents, publishers, etc., and say, here, this is where I've been published. So they can see a complete story. And now here's my book. But again, it is, what's your timeline? You know, do you want to be out there now and you just don't care? You know, you don't care if it's with at the big publisher. You don't care if it's just an ebook or if it's something that you have to order copies of yourself when you want to sell it. You know, Kindle Direct is out there. You know, there are all kinds of writing conferences like this and like others where you can go and talk to authors and say, well, what do you recommend doing? How do I go about getting it into Barnes and Nobles? How do I go about getting it into traditional brick and mortar bookstores? And how much time do you have to devote to that? Because I know one of the reasons that I keep going the way that I do is I got 3 kids I'm raising, taking care of my elderly parents. One of my kids is severely disabled, and I have to deal with my ex-wife's shenanigans. So, and I'm a full-time job on top of all that. So it's like finding time just to write is a pain in the butt. So I'm like, okay, when I get the time, I write, and then I have people that I pay that I'm like, okay, here, Amy, cover and format, Grammarly, edit, beta readers, have fun, you know?
Yeah.
But then you do stuff like this and you meet people, you network, and you chew their ears. But I mean, what is your end goal? Do you want to see it on a shelf at Barnes and Nobles, or do you not care that it's just, I'm going to a convention and I'm selling it myself, and maybe I'll get it in the hands of the right person and it'll blow up, or, you know, I'm reviewing stories and a publisher of a small press says, hey, I like your review. Do you want to do more? Oh, you write too? You know, it depends on how you want to go about doing it and what your end goal is. If you just want to get a book published and you just want to be able to put it up on a mantle and give it to friends and family and say, look, I published a book. There's vanity presses, you know, but those are dangerous territory because some of them will hold the rights to your books for way longer than you think they will.
Which was something I wanted to ask the two of you about, especially Sarena, since you have the publishing experience. What are red flags to look for when you're looking for a publisher?
I would never recommend anyone go to a vanity publisher for any reason. I think if you just want that book to give to your friends and family, there are ways to do it that are less predatory. Mm-hmm. So if a publisher is asking you to pay them, that is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
How does a vanity press exist when you can just go to Amazon and?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I think
because of the
some
promises
people
they
know
make.
better, and some people, I think, they don't want to undertake all that work themselves. Because even if you're publishing it yourself, like through Amazon, you still have to handle the cover and making sure you're to the guidelines, and you still have to handle the formatting of the interior of the book. Mm-hmm. And so I think, some people are like, I'll just throw money at somebody and they can do it all for me. But
yeah, and the vanity publishers make it look really appealing. They're like, it's a package deal. Send us $9,000 and we'll give you a cover and formatting and publicity that they don't end up doing. And if you're doing it yourself, you have to track down your own cover artist. You have to track down somebody that can, it's not a package deal, and so. But it will cost you less than $9,000.
Yeah,
you should. But yeah, I think a lot of people think, I just send a check and they'll handle it all. But it's a scam.
Oh, and the money will come rolling in, right?
And it never does.
It never does. Yeah.
So so that's a big one. You shouldn't pay the publisher. Publishers should pay you.
Yeah.
And another big one is how many titles are they putting out per year? And there's two sides of this. If they are hardly putting any books out at all, that's a red flag. If they do like one book a year and they put everything into that book, and that's just how they work, that's fine. But if it's like it's been a couple of years since they've had a new title, but they're doing open submissions, and or they sometimes put out 3 books and then sometimes only 1 and then sometimes none. Like, if it's really inconsistent, that's a big red flag. Or if they're pumping out too many books, that's also a red flag. If they've got 30, 60 titles a year and they're just kind of chunking them out, that can be a red flag, because often what happens with small presses is they get too ambitious and they end up with too many projects and they end up not putting their resources into each project. They're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall, and maybe some of it sticks and some of it doesn't.
And that was like when I went with the first small press. I talked to some other authors and my stack full. I'm like, well, what do I look for here? And he's like, okay, talk to the other authors they publish.
Yes. Reach
out, talk to the other authors they publish, look for reviews, look for complaints.
That's another thing too, if the books have no reviews.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag.
Well, not just look for the reviews on the books, but look on the reviews of the publisher, because publishers have reviews, even small presses. And I know when I first looked up that publisher, I'm like, ooh, I'm seeing a couple red flags here, And the acquisition editor said, look, that's one of the reasons I'm here, is I have taken care of all that. Those are 5-year-old reviews from when he first started and didn't know what he was doing. He's cleaned up his act. Look at and I reached out to some of the other authors and I said, hey, what's your experience been? And for the most part, their experiences were positive. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to pull the trigger on this. The second time around with Amy, she was just starting it up. But I talked to other authors who worked with her, and they said, look, she's got the business train going. She knows what she's doing. She'll be able to handle it. And then once she started working with other people's stuff that she didn't have the passion for, it didn't quite work out. And then the whole movie thing kind of really screwed up. So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm going to add on to what you said about looking for reviews. Because it is important to know if you're dealing with somebody legit or not. There are, unfortunately, plenty of people in the literary world who just want to take advantage of those of us who want to get our words out in front of people. About 3 months ago, I got an email out of the blue from an audiobook publisher, and I almost deleted it because I was like, this is a scam. Like, I'll write them back and they'll be like, send us $9,000 and we'll put out your audiobooks. So I Googled the name of the company and I was like, oh, okay, they're a legit company, okay. And then I went onto Facebook into some of the author groups that I'm in, and I searched for anybody who had talked about this publisher, and I found out that some of the best writers in my genre are with this audiobook company. So I was like, great. So I signed a contract for audiobooks.
Nice.
But do your research, because you want to be sure that whoever you're working with is going to be somebody that's reputable, and that other authors, especially authors in your genre, speak highly of, because that really is a good indicator of whether or not you should be aligning yourself with these publishers and these companies. We are only about 10 minutes until the end. Any of you have questions?
Oh, I have one more.
Sure.
Have you had any experience with Patreon or Kickstarter, positive or negative?
Actually, the person who really talked to you on that is
Jessica Feinberg.
Feinberg.
If you go, do you know Jessica? Yeah, she is like the queen of Kickstarter projects. Chat with her. She's always happy to share her knowledge about what she's done.
Good to know.
I've done 2 Kickstarters, but they were for anthologies. They weren't for single author titles. But I had good experiences with the Kickstarter, but it is a ton of work.
It is.
And quite exhausting. So
if you're going to run a Kickstarter, from what I've talked to with people who've done Kickstarters for other things, is they say, basically be prepared for that to be your full-time job during the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah,
because you are going to be answering questions and getting it out there, and it is a lot of management. And even once it's over, for like a month or 2 after, they're like, yeah, you're sending out all the stuff and you're doing all the things and thanking all the people, and they're like, at that point you kind of hire somebody.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to your original question about the path that you could try. So my path was very similar to what you were originally describing. Of like, I originally published short stories in like my college literary journal, and then I did some that were just online and not paid, and then I kind of worked my way up until I got to like the SIPWA pro rate and things like that. But I would publish a ton of short stories and then started novels, and it definitely does what MJ was saying, of it kind of builds your resume, and it gives you the ability to, when you send that query letter, say, hey, I've also been published in Lightspeed and Dreamforge and these magazines. I will say, as a publisher, when I'm reading query letters, which I don't do anymore because we don't accept queries anymore, but when we were open for submissions, I would get a lot of queries that had been published in this place, and I'm like, I haven't heard of any of those, and so like that's kind of meaningless, unless it's like the big magazines that I recognize, and then I know that I can trust that writer a little bit more, because they've sort of been vetted by those places. So what's on your resume matters, not just having credits. Maybe is good, validation for you. Maybe gives you the encouragement to keep going. Getting those acceptances. Maybe that's enough. But where you're getting published kind of matters as well. And I had another really smart thing to say about this, and now it's gone out of my head, but I'm going to ramble until maybe it comes back.
Well, can I ask you a question to follow up on that? So what did you find out? There's so many places that are taking short stories now, and I'm just getting to
there's ton.
So how do you know which ones are recognizable?
Yeah, so there's a website called the Submission Grinder, and that's the good place to go to find short story markets. The Submission Grinder, it's a database, and you can search by your genre and by how much they pay and things like that. And social media sort of can help you gauge and awards lists, like who what magazines have short stories and novelettes on the awards list, things like that. But mainly it's like read the magazine, read a couple stories from it. Are they publishing stories that you think are quality, that you would be proud to have your words next to? And that's really what it comes down to. Yeah.
And sometimes you do look at the off-the-wall places. I mean, let's face it, Dune was published originally by a car parts book, as
right.
Like a Schauer.
Yeah.
That worked out well for them.
I mean, seriously,
I remember what I was gonna say though. It's so that is one path, right? That you can publish a bunch of short stories and then and then work your way up to novels. But if what you really want to do is write novels, and writing a short story is like hard for you, it's not really what you want to do, then don't waste your time with that. Like, there are people who have debuted in traditional publishing with a novel that never had any of that stuff before. Yep. Right? So if you look at that advice of like, okay, I want to write a book, so I gotta start with slasher, you do not have to work your way up that way. If you are a big thinker and you have big ideas, focus on the novel and don't mess with the short stories.
And good writing is good writing.
Yes.
It doesn't matter whether or not you've had something published before. If an editor or an agent looks at your work and is like, this is amazing, that's what ultimately matters, is having that good manuscript that you're putting into their hands. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So, okay, so you were kind of answering it, so you don't necessarily need to get all these like short stories published and everything before an agent will even consider you.
You don't have to. But like you said, it does sometimes help. It can help. But I mean, if you're writing, if the writing sample you send them is powerful enough that they're just like, oh, yes, this is what I want. And that's the thing. You send them the very best thing you've written from the book. Yeah. Even if it's like, that middle section that there's no way they understand what's going on because all this stuff has happened. But god dang, that is a good section of the book, that really showcases your writing. That's what you send them, because that's what I think is like what a lot of the submissions are, first 3 chapters and like a random chapter out of the middle of the book sometimes. And it's like that random chapter, you're like, okay, what's the best chapter in the book? I know, like with this one, it's like the crash scene. I'm so proud of that freaking scene. I love that freaking scene, And people are like, yeah, we love it. That is such an intense scene that they're like, ooh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's like, especially because it's not like pilot number 5. It's the main character. And you're like, wait, is he going to die? It's like, because it's not the only viewpoint character. It's like, is this suddenly going to shift viewpoints to this character and they're going to carry the rest of the book? Because, it's like Razor's Edge. He's going to live. And that's the kind of stuff you want to show. You want to show what is where you want to showcase your best, you know?
And this confidence in like this crash scene and how good it is, that is what you have to convey in your query letters. You have to absolutely believe in your work and believe that it is worthy of being published if any agent or publisher is going to agree with it. And so I think you know, we're raised to be like all humble and stuff, but query letters are the place to brag about how great you are and show them how great you are. And I think that, you know, even though it seems like a small detail, I think you have to convey that confidence in anybody that you approach. Not like, oh, well, hey, you know, I wrote a book, and maybe take a look. Be like, no, here is the best thriller that you're going to read this year. Check it out. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'll just comment. When I submitted my query letter for the Broken Front series, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, so I looked up every query letter that I could find online. I researched all of them. I took all little pieces out of all of them and into the query letter. And someone said, this is one of the best query letters I've ever read.
That is the way to do it. I mean, when I was querying agents, I used the writer's market because they have a great little guide at the beginning to how to write a query letter. And I did it like a formula. And it's,
There's actually a place online I found where authors share the query letters that got them.
Yeah, that's really good.
I like that.
And you can read it and you say, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing wrong. I misspelled my name. I did misspell my name. Okay, and I had to go by the wrong name for several months until I just very sheepishly said, okay, I misspelled my name. But you accepted it, we've already signed the contract.
And that happens all the time. I mean, that's like a joke of like, you know, people say that happens, and it's like, was it Parks and Rec, the guy Jerry, you know, and his real name was like Gary or whatever. It's like, I've known people like that. They get a name their first day and everybody just sticks with it, you know.
Every author I've ever talked to, and I ask them about querying, right? And none of them say they're good at it because, I did that a few times and I got one accepted, and then that's not a problem so much anymore.
Yeah.
And so no one ever gets good at this. That was the impression that I got, okay?
Well, and it's the same thing that I'll tell, like you said, you know, be as confident as possible. It's what I tell people when I go to conventions, especially little ones. And when I'm selling my book at a convention, I'm up, I'm engaging, I'm talking to people, I'm being confident. And then you get that person who's just sitting there.
You want to buy my book?
And it's like, no, you want to be up there. You want to buy my book, you know?
Y'all, thanks for showing up at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Obviously, the three of us were around today. If you have questions, want to come talk to us. I've also got some goodies up here, including a QR code to free short stories and novellas. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your con.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play-In Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, please check out D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Ragnarok Enroll a Scion Hero to Ragnarok Story. Also, check out our Patreon page for more content and behind-the-scenes things, as well as joining us for a one-shot game or two.
Actually, biological warfare in space wouldn't be that hard because you're in sealed environments. And if you can introduce something to the environmental control system, it can spread rapidly.
Yeah, but I'm kind of thinking though, you don't really see a whole lot of stuff that isn't in space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about science fiction, I mean, technically, if you want to get down to it, Frankenstein is science fiction.
That's true.
Very early science fiction.
Okay, yeah, that is true.
That's just a fun one I like to kick out there every once in a while.
Science fiction go on.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the time, the idea of organ transplants was just becoming like an idea. And so Mary Shelley took that idea and ran with it and said, what is the ultimate expression of that? And it's creating a monster out of spare parts, you know?
So I'll just kind of act as moderator again?
No, no problem.
If you're with people coming this again, just because I think
we're
all moving a little slower this morning.
There were some good parties last night.
I didn't get up till almost 7 this morning, so it's late for me. And I live up in River Valley, so I had to drive down.
Ugh. I mean, I drove over too, but it was not that far.
Yeah. Well, also, my girlfriend had to go pick up her daughter and take her to a gymnastics meet this morning at 9:30.
It's a busy Sunday morning for y'all. Yeah.
Always is.
Let me throw something out before we get started that's got a little bit off. I read the Writer magazine and Writer's Digest, and it seems like they've stopped publishing the last couple of months.
Have they?
Apparently the writer, the publisher, Metaphor, was purchased by a jazz site called Bebop. They wanted the jazz magazine that they published. And apparently, if you go to the writer website, it just goes to the Bebop website, and it kind of ends there.
Wow. Because Writer's Digest has always gotten like really good.
And Writer's Digest, I don't know what happened with them, but I was reading them both on News Plus, and both of them, their last issues were September, October. I went to the Writer's Digest website. It's still there, and it says they're still publishing. I tried to subscribe directly, and as soon as I hit subscribe, I hit an error. So I'm not
What
sure
it might be is if they just got purchased, there's probably just a whole ton of reorganization going on right now. There's probably, they're merging, people are being fired, people are being hired, everything is getting transferred around, and everything's just going to be, I would give it.
Yeah, there's no publicity about it. There's just a couple of people going, WTF.
How strange. I wonder if they were affected by the Amazon subscription issue as well.
They probably were, because that's how I was subscribing to them.
With the Amazon is no longer offering subscriptions to magazines through Amazon. Yeah, and I mean it really affected things like Clark's World and FNSF.
I had to go to Patreon to subscribe to Clark's World.
Yeah,
I had to do direct subscriptions to Analog and Asimov's and FNSF.
Yeah.
Writer's Digest was one that I was getting through that.
Yeah, so they made it.
That might be part of it too. If they were really relying on that, and now suddenly that's been taken away, it's probably taking them some time to be like, okay, how do we do this again?
Yeah.
Well, and Amazon doesn't give you, as you know, customer information, so it's like they have no way to know.
Oh yeah, so they have no way of reaching out to their customers and saying it. So they're probably. It could just be a reorg issue. I would honestly, in a situation like that, and I work for the government. When we have reorgs, it takes 6 months for anything to get totally settled out. So it's like, it takes time for things to settle out. So I would honestly just give it a couple months and just keep checking.
I'm looking at it. I'm writing it also this morning.
Yeah, I mean, if they're gone, that's the end of an era.
Seriously.
I mean, that's what I started.
I
used to go to Walden Books and buy my issue of the Writer.
Yeah. Well, and it might also be that maybe the company is looking to find somebody to acquire it. If they're focused on the jazz aspect, they don't care about the writing aspect. They might be sitting there going, okay, who wants to acquire this thing? And we're just going to let it languish for now until somebody says, no, this has to continue. Kind of like, what's that restaurant that closed? The Boondocks, when that closed.
I don't know that restaurant.
It's a wine bar.
Oh, how sad that it closed.
Yeah, it's a wine bar up on First, but the neighborhood, when it was first built, the neighborhood was like, oh yeah, we're going to go to a wine bar, Now it's like, a wine bar? So it closed. And then one of the patrons bought it, reopened it, and was like, hey, it's a wine bar, And they're trying to get all, the hipsters and stuff. And like, hey, it's a wine bar. Come on, you want this. It's, so. Apparently it's doing pretty well. So.
Oh,
yeah.
So it is open. Nice.
Yeah. So they reopened and are it's now Nancy's Boondocks or something like that. But yeah, something like that might happen. They might just be looking to find somebody to buy it because they don't want to deal with it. Especially if they're more focused on the jazz aspect.
Yeah, apparently they bought it just for that one jazz magazine that they published. Because I found an outdoor photography forum where they had a couple of really good photography magazines that have suddenly disappeared, and they're very upset about that.
Yeah.
Its magazines are more far and few between than they used to be. Yeah.
Well, a lot of it's gone web-based, or it's gone blog-based, or it's gone to some other format to do it, because publishing a magazine is expensive.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, I did fortunately there was a grant from the government that did it through the library. It was like $200 or $300 to print 20 copies of a poetry chapbook. But it was on lovely paper with lovely cardstock with a lino cut cover, and the text on the cover that went through a an actual press. So I mean, I got my government's money's worth out of it.
Well, I guess we should go ahead and get started. I expect some folks who are having a hard time waking up to trickle in as we go.